The air in the Mato Grosso does not move. It hangs beneath the canopy, heavy with the smell of rotting mahogany and damp earth. I stood at the edge of the Zinga River, holding a brass compass casing recovered from a trading post 300 miles downstream. The glass was cracked, the needle rusted to the pin. It was the 29th of May. Exactly 50 years had passed since Colonel Percy Harrison Fawcett, his son Jack, and Raleigh Rimmell walked into this tree line and did not walk out. They carried 60 pounds of gear apiece. They carried coordinates drawn from an 18th century manuscript. They carried a belief in a stone city they called Z. I came to trace the route of their final march. Colonel Percy Harrison Fawcett was 57 years old when he mounted his final expedition. He was an artillery officer, trained in surveying by the Royal Geographical Society. He had served in Ceylon, where he first learned the meticulous art of jungle surveying. He had commanded an artillery brigade in Flanders during the Great War, surviving the mud and the gas of the Somme. He returned from the trenches with his obsession intact. Between 1906 and 1924, he undertook 7 major expeditions into the Amazon basin. He mapped the Rio Verde. He traced the border between Brazil and Bolivia. He carried a 60-pound pack through jungle that had broken men half his age. He was methodical. He did not drink. He did not smoke. He believed the jungle was a mathematical problem that could be solved through endurance. During his early surveys, Fawcett spent hours in the National Archives in Rio de Janeiro. In 1920, he found a document catalogued as Manuscript 512. It was written in 1753 by a Portuguese bandeirante, a fortune hunter pushing into the interior. The manuscript described a ruined city of monumental stone architecture, hidden deep within the Mato Grosso. The writer detailed multi-story buildings, broad avenues, and silver artifacts. Most historians dismissed the document as a fiction, a lure to secure funding from the Portuguese crown. Fawcett did not. He cross-referenced the manuscript with fragments of pottery he had found in the riverbanks of the Zinga. He measured the geometric precision of the shards. He noted the agricultural terra preta, the dark, fertile earth engineered by human hands, stretching for miles beneath the canopy. He concluded that the Amazon had once supported a massive, sedentary civilization. He named this theoretical capital the city of Zid. By 1924, Fawcett had secured funding from a London-based syndicate called the Glove. He presented his plan to the Royal Geographical Society. He would enter the Mato Grosso from the south, strike north across the Zinga Basin, and emerge at the Amazon River. He estimated the journey would take 2 years. He requested no rescue party. He stated clearly that if he did not emerge, any search expedition would likely meet the same fate. He knew the terrain. He knew the indigenous groups, the Kalapalo, the Kuakuro, the Suya. He knew the diseases. He believed his previous exposure had granted him immunity to malaria. He believed his careful rationing and strict discipline would protect his men. He was not a man prone to romantic delusions. He was a surveyor. He had a map, he had a transit, and he had a destination. The Royal Geographical Society provided a portion of the funding, though many members expressed quiet doubts about the existence of Z. Fawcett ignored them. He began assembling his equipment and his crew. He required men of exceptional physical stamina, men who would not question his authority when the rations ran low and the canopy closed in. He looked past seasoned explorers and military men. Fawcett chose only 2 companions for the 1925 expedition. The first was his eldest son, Jack Fawcett. Jack was 21 years old, tall, heavily muscled, and entirely untested in the jungle. He had spent his youth in England and California, listening to his father's lectures on the Amazon. The second was Raleigh Rimmell, a childhood friend of Jack's. Rimmell was 22, a former clerk who possessed a strong constitution but no field experience. Fawcett preferred it this way. He wrote that large expeditions failed because they required too many porters, too many rations, and too much noise. A 3-man team could move quietly. They could live off the land. They would not present a threat to the indigenous tribes they encountered. The provisioning was exact. I reviewed the cargo manifests in the archives of the Royal Geographical Society. They carried 2 Winchester repeating rifles chambered in .44 caliber, a pair of 12-gauge shotguns, and 3 Mauser automatic pistols. Ammunition was heavy, so they packed only what they deemed strictly necessary for hunting and defense. Their scientific instruments included a 6-inch theodolite, 2 prismatic compasses, a sextant, and an aneroid barometer. They carried a plate camera and several dozen glass negatives packed in wooden crates. For trade, they brought knives, fish hooks, glass beads, and small mirrors. Fawcett carried a ukulele to entertain the indigenous tribes, a tactic he had used successfully on previous surveys. He also packed a small medical kit containing quinine, iodine, and bandages, though he firmly believed that a clean diet and constant movement were the best defenses against tropical fevers. Their rations were minimal. They packed dried meat, sugar, tea, and a high-calorie paste of Fawcett's own design. Each man carried a pack weighing between 50 and 60 pounds. They wore light gabardine suits, Stetson hats, and knee-high boots to protect against snakebites and insects. They arrived in Rio de Janeiro in January 1925. The Brazilian press treated them as celebrities. Fawcett gave few interviews. He was anxious to leave the coast and the bureaucracy behind. By early February, they had traveled by train to Sao Paulo, and then to the edge of the railway line at Porto Esperança. From there, they took a river steamer up the Paraguay River to Cuiabá, the capital of Mato Grosso. Cuiabá was a frontier town, a staging point for rubber tappers and diamond prospectors. It was here that Fawcett purchased their pack animals. He bought 2 dogs, 8 mules, and 2 horses. He hired 2 local guides to assist with the animals during the first leg of the journey. The guides would return to Cuiabá once the expedition reached the edge of the unexplored territory. On April 20, 1925, the 5 men and 12 animals departed Cuiabá. They walked north, away from the riverways and into the scrubland of the Cerrado. The dry season was beginning. The ground was hard, and the heat was absolute. Fawcett walked at the front, setting a pace that the younger men struggled to match. Jack and Raleigh were already suffering. The route from Cuiabá to the Becaire post covered roughly 300 miles of broken terrain. It was a transitional zone between the dry savanna and the dense rainforest. The trail was faint, maintained only by occasional telegraph linesmen working for the Brazilian government. The expedition moved slowly. The mules were heavily laden and difficult to manage in the heat. Within the first week, the physical toll became apparent. Raleigh Rimmell developed severe ulcerations on his legs from tick bites. The wounds became infected. He walked with a pronounced limp, his boots wrapped in bandages. Jack Fawcett fared slightly better, but he too was losing weight rapidly. Colonel Fawcett recorded these details in his logbook with clinical detachment. He noted the temperature, the barometric pressure, and the coordinates. He rarely mentioned his son's fatigue or Rimmell's infection, except to note how it affected their daily mileage. By mid-May, they reached the Becaire post. It was a small settlement, the last outpost of the Brazilian government's Indian Protection Service. Beyond this point lay the Zinga Basin, a territory inhabited by tribes that had little or no contact with the outside world. The expedition rested at the post for several days. Fawcett purchased additional manioc flour and dried fish. He observed that Rimmell's condition was deteriorating. The infection had spread, and the young man was running a fever. Fawcett offered Rimmell the opportunity to return to Cuiabá with the hired guides. Rimmell refused. He stated he would continue as long as he could walk. Fawcett accepted this decision without argument. On May 20, the expedition left the Becaire post. They crossed the Paranatinga River and entered the true rainforest. The transition from the Cerrado to the primary rainforest was abrupt. The temperature dropped slightly under the canopy, but the humidity spiked. The ground was slick with decaying vegetation. Every step required balance. Every branch held the potential for venomous spiders or bullet ants. Fawcett navigated by compass, cutting a path northeast. The undergrowth was dense, requiring constant work with the machetes. The air was saturated with moisture. The hired guides, a pair of local men named Roberto and Bernardino, grew increasingly nervous. They feared the Suya and the Kalapalo, tribes known to defend their territory aggressively. Fawcett did not share their fear. He believed his peaceful approach and trade goods would ensure safe passage. On May 29, the expedition reached a location Fawcett had used during a previous survey in 1920. It was a small clearing near a tributary of the Zinga. During the earlier expedition, his horse had died of exhaustion at this exact spot. Fawcett named the location Dead Horse Camp. It was here that he made his final preparations to enter the unknown. He paid Roberto and Bernardino and instructed them to return to Cuiabá. He handed them a bundle of letters to be mailed from the coast. He watched the two guides turn back south, leading the remaining mules. Fawcett, Jack, and Raleigh were now alone. They had 2 dogs, a few weeks of rations, and the final dispatch from Dead Horse Camp is the last reliable evidence of the Fawcett expedition. I have read the original letter in the archives of the Royal Geographical Society. The handwriting is steady, the ink unfaded. It is dated May 29, 1925. Fawcett recorded his coordinates as 11 degrees, 43 minutes south, and 54 degrees, 35 minutes west. He wrote to his wife, Nina. The tone is optimistic, almost casual. He described the camp, the swarms of PM flies, and the oppressive heat. He mentioned that Raleigh Rimmell's leg was still heavily bandaged, but that the young man was bearing the pain well. Jack, he noted, was in excellent health and high spirits. Fawcett outlined his immediate plan. They would cross the tributary and proceed northeast, toward the Culuine River. He estimated they would reach the territory of the Kalapalo tribe within a few days. From there, they would strike out toward the coordinates he believed held the city of Zid. The final sentence of the letter is well known. He wrote, "You need have no fear of any failure." He handed this letter, along with dispatches for the North American newspaper Alliance, to the guide Bernardino. Fawcett's instructions to the outside world were absolute. He had left a specific code with his wife to be used in the event he managed to send a telegram from a remote outpost. The code words covered various scenarios: discovery of ruins, hostile encounters, or delays. No telegram ever arrived. The North American newspaper Alliance published his final dispatch, and then the column inches dried up. The public fascination, however, only grew. The image of the stoic Victorian explorer vanishing into the green abyss captured the post-war imagination. The guides departed on the morning of May 29. Bernardino later reported that he looked back before the trail curved out of sight. He saw Colonel Fawcett, Jack, and Raleigh standing at the edge of the clearing. They had hoisted their heavy packs. They were facing north. Then the guides moved on, and the expedition was swallowed by the forest. For 2 years, there was silence. This was expected. Fawcett had stated he would be gone for at least 2 years and had explicitly forbidden any rescue missions. He knew that a search party would face the same logistical nightmares and diseases that he did. The Royal Geographical Society waited. The newspaper syndicates waited. By 1927, the silence had stretched too long. The Brazilian government reported no sightings of the men emerging from the northern Amazon. No indigenous traders brought out Fawcett's compasses or rifles. The men had vanished entirely. The coordinates of Dead Horse Camp marked the end of a documented trail. Everything beyond 11 degrees, 43 minutes south is conjecture. We do not know how far they marched. We do not know if Rimmell's infection worsened and halted their progress. We do not know if they reached the Culuine River. The primary sources end on a piece of paper carried out by a hired guide. The rest of the story is written in the attempts of other men to find. In 1928, Commander George Diet organized the first official search expedition. Diet was an experienced explorer, well-funded and heavily armed. He did not share Fawcett's belief in traveling light. Diet brought 26 men, tons of supplies, and radio equipment. He traced Fawcett's route from Cuiabá to the Bakairi post, and then north to Dead Horse Camp. The trail was 3 years cold. The jungle reclaims a cut path in a matter of months. Diet relied on local indigenous guides to navigate the territory between the Zinga tributaries. In August, Diet's party reached a village of the Kalapalo people, situated near the Kuluine River. Through interpreters, Diet questioned the village elders. The Kalapalo remembered Fawcett. They described an older white man, a younger white man, and a third man who walked with a severe limp. They stated that the three men had stayed in their village for a few days. Fawcett had traded knives and fishhooks for food. The Kalapalo chief, Aloik, told Diet that he had warned Fawcett not to proceed east. He told the colonel that the territory belonged to the Suya, a tribe known to kill intruders. According to Aloik, Fawcett ignored the warning. The Kalapalo watched the three men cross the Kuluine River and walk into the eastern forest. They saw the smoke from Fawcett's campfire for 5 days. On the 6th day, there was no smoke. The Kalapalo assumed the men had been killed. Diet searched the village. He found a metal trunk bearing the name of Fawcett's London outfitter. He found a silver medallion that belonged to the expedition. The Kalapalo claimed these items were gifts, freely given by Fawcett before he departed. Diet grew suspicious. He noticed that the Kalapalo warriors were gathering weapons. He believed the tribe had murdered Fawcett and his men for their rifles and trade goods. Fearing an ambush, Diet ordered his men to abandon their heavy equipment. In the middle of the night, the search party fled down the river in canoes. Diet's retreat was chaotic. He left behind hundreds of pounds of provisions, including his heavy radio transmitter. His frantic escape down the Zinga River took weeks, during which his men suffered from malaria and near starvation. When he finally reached civilization, his dramatic account of a narrow escape from hostile natives sold thousands of newspapers. It cemented the narrative that the Kalapalo were responsible. Yet, anthropologists who later studied the Kalapalo noted that they were an inherently peaceful agricultural society. Murdering guests for trade goods violated their core cultural taboos. The evidence simply did not align with Diet's panicked conclusions. Diet returned to London and announced that Fawcett was dead, killed by the Kalapalo. The Royal Geographical Society accepted his report. But Diet had no bodies, no journals, and no conclusive proof. The metal trunk and the medallion could easily have been discarded by Fawcett to lighten his load. The Kalapalo's story of the smoke stopping on the 6th day was circumstantial. Diet had found the last place Fawcett was seen alive, but he had not found. The decades that followed produced a steady stream of rumors and false trails. In 1933, a Swiss trapper named Stefan Rattin emerged from the Mato Grosso claiming he had seen an old white man held captive in a remote village. Rattin said the man wore skins and had a long white beard. He claimed the man spoke English and asked him to contact a friend in Sao Paulo. Rattin returned to the jungle to rescue the man and was never seen again. Later that same year, a theodolite compass belonging to Fawcett was found near the territory of the Baishari tribe. It was in excellent condition. The Royal Geographical Society verified the serial number. However, it was discovered that Fawcett had left this specific compass behind before he even reached Dead Horse Camp. It proved nothing about his final fate. Other artifacts surfaced periodically, only to be debunked. A wooden nameplate bearing Fawcett's name was discovered in a trading post, but it was later identified as a piece of equipment lost during his 1914 expedition. A missionary reported seeing a blue-eyed indigenous child, sparking rumors that Jack Fawcett had survived and integrated into a local tribe. These stories were investigated and dismissed. The sheer volume of false leads complicated the historical record. Every prospector and rubber tapper who emerged from the Mato Grosso had a story to sell to the newspapers. The most significant development occurred in 1951. Orlando Villas-Boas, a Brazilian activist and indigenous rights advocate, was working in the Zinga region. He had spent years building relationships with the Kalapalo. A Kalapalo elder confessed to Villas-Boas that his tribe had indeed killed Fawcett. The elder claimed Fawcett had disrespected the village chief and failed to offer adequate gifts. According to the elder, the Kalapalo clubbed the three men to death and buried them near a lake. Villas-Boas asked to see the graves. The elder led him to a site. Villas-Boas excavated the area and recovered a skeleton. The bones were brought to London for analysis. The Royal Anthropological Institute examined the remains. They measured the femur length and the dental records. The skeleton belonged to a man who was roughly 5'7". Percy Fawcett was over 6 feet tall. Furthermore, the skull contained intact upper teeth. Fawcett wore an upper denture. The bones were not his. Villiers-Bors later suggested the Kalapalo had provided the bones of a deceased tribesman to satisfy the white men and stop the relentless questioning. The Kalapalo themselves later retracted the confession, stating it was a story invented to appease the aggressive search parties that kept invading their land. By the 1990s, expeditions equipped with ground-penetrating radar and satellite imagery scoured the Zinga Basin. They found no rifles. They found no brass belt buckles. They found no glass photographic plates. The acidic soil of the Amazon consumes organic material rapidly, but brass and glass endure. Yet, the forest yielded nothing. The physical record of the force. I have reviewed the maps, the letters, and the expedition logs. The evidence allows for only a few concrete conclusions. Percy Fawcett, Jack Fawcett, and Raleigh Rimmell crossed the Coolouine River in early June, 1925. They were undernourished, carrying heavy loads, and moving through hostile terrain. Rimmell was severely compromised by infection. They had no medical supplies capable of treating sepsis or malaria. The most probable outcome is the most mundane. They succumbed to the environment. Whether by disease, starvation, or a localized conflict with an indigenous group, their progress halted somewhere east of the Coolouine. They did not find a city of stone. They did not find paved roads or silver arches. But Fawcett was not entirely wrong. Modern satellite surveys of the Zinga Basin have revealed massive geometric earthworks, defensive moats, and the remnants of large-scale agriculture. The region once supported tens of thousands of people in interconnected settlements. The civilization Fawcett envisioned did exist, though it was built of earth and wood, not stone. It had been decimated by European diseases centuries before he arrived. He was walking over the ruins of Zed without realizing it. The jungle had already reclaimed it. We will likely never find the remains of the 3 men. The Amazon basin covers 2.7 million square miles. A brass compass casing or a rusted rifle barrel is a speck of dust in an ocean of green. Consider the logistics of those final days. They were carrying over 150 pounds of equipment between 3 men. The terrain east of the Coolouine is a dense matrix of thorny scrub and seasonal floodplains. Without a guide, navigating this landscape requires hacking every foot of the path with a machete. In the dry season, water sources are scarce and often stagnant. A man burning calories at that rate requires gallons of water a day to survive. If Rimmell's leg infection became septic, he would have been unable to walk. Fawcett and his son would have been forced to halt. In that static position, their limited rations of dried meat and manioc flour would have vanished within a week. The reality of the Amazon is quiet. Men do not usually fall in battle here. They sit down to rest, and they simply lack the strength to stand back up. The Kalapalo may have told the truth about the smoke stopping on the 6th day. 6 days of marching east from the river would place them deep in the brush, far from any navigable water. The letters from Dead Horse Camp remain their final testament. They walked into the tree line, and the canopy closed behind them. The exact coordinates of their final camp, the manner of their deaths, and the resting place of their equipment remain unknown. If these stories of vanished crews and silent ships speak to you, subscribe.